It's Jefferson, climbs the ladder. Oh my goodness! Come
on! What is up, Jabroni? JJ back here from Run Pure Sports, Run Pure Bets, talking a little MLB on this fine Saturday. Where are we at? July 15th. What a time to be alive. I'll run through the slate. I'll talk mostly bets. I'll talk a little bit of DFS. Today I'm not playing much DFS myself, but doesn't mean I can't obviously give you guys all the kind of feedback and such. Obviously, they split it today with a smaller slate early, and then their main slate with a 12-gamer, I think, at 7. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I have a good feel for pricing and whatnot, but I know I'm not going to be, I'm not going to have time to really build diligent lineups, if you will. But again, happy to talk on a bunch of different DFS perspectives. And I did look at ownership for the early slate, and everything. I'll be honest, for a 4-game slate, it is pretty spread out. Like, it's not like nothing crazy. Like almost, 4-game slates, you kind of anticipate 1 or 2 pitchers being 60-65% owned. You call it 2 to 3 bats that are going to be over 50% owned. It doesn't look like that from the projections. So it's pretty spread out for a 4-game slate. So, kind of kicking myself a bit for maybe not going into it a bit deeper earlier, because it is a little spread out. When I approach early slates like that when they're smaller and the games are a little spread out as far as the start of times, I typically like to play them when the slates are built like this. I don't like them when they're so top heavy. Because you're ultimately really trying to fade. Ultimately, you're trying to fade good options, with the hope for leverage in those areas. But today's not that day. It's definitely pretty spread out overall. And the pitching matchups that you would go with are relatively safe as well. So anyway, what's up, Easy? What's up, Derek? So early, Boston, Arizona for the early slate. So I don't totally mind the Arizona side. However, as far as their sticks go, but I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of, truly a big fan of either in particular. Call me indifferent, because I'll talk more on it as we get to the games, but I do always like Stroman at home. I know Boston's been hitting, so it's kind of hard to fade that group, right? But Stroman's typically pretty solid at home and gets a ton of ground balls, which you would think, might find their way into a ton of balls will find their way into the dirt in that game, especially on the Boston side. But again, it's tough to look past hot sticks. And the Red Sox, I think they've lost like one of their last 12 games, something like that, and they've been hitting a ton. So no, I can't totally be indifferent or hate that, but I definitely lean on more of the side of I wouldn't prefer the Boston bats, considering as far as what we have from an ownership standpoint for the Sox. Yeah, I mean, nothing crazy. Basically everybody's sub 20%. I mean, Paxton's going to be 30+% from an ownership standpoint, but you're looking at sub 20% ownership on those bats, which again, for a 4-game slate, that's not totally crazy. So call me totally on that end. Call me indifferent. What's up, A through Z? Long time no see, my man. How you been? All right. So I'll just start with the game now. Let's keep in mind, folks, we got basically a 17.5 game slate today, right? You got the game that's going to resume with the Cards at round 2-ish from yesterday. Then you got 2 double headers today. So just a lot of baseball coming at us pretty quick. Yesterday was nice, right? You had quite a few upsets. We'll call that, maybe some party hangover from, some of these other guys getting back and whatnot, and the 5-day break for the folks that weren't in the All-Star game. But either way, obviously it's good to have baseball back in a full swing. The first game up here, Phillies Padres. Now I'm seeing somewhat conflicting information here, because in one breath it looks like Taijuan Walker's starting, but in another breath, Ranger Suarez is kind of in the mix. Because it looks like they moved Taijuan Walker to be the 7 o'clock game, the 7 o'clock starter, and Ranger Suarez to the 1 o'clock starter, but ESPN hasn't updated that. So I'm not sure if sportsbooks are wrong or if ESPN's wrong. Let me just use a different sportsbook as well to confirm, because I know what DraftKings has. Yeah, so it's got to be Ranger Suarez pitching in this game, especially since the line moved a bit as well. So probably Ranger Suarez going for this 1 o'clock game, which, look, we saw it yesterday. You throw a lefty that's susceptible to being hit at this Padres lineup. I mean, that ball Tatis hit yesterday. I don't even know if it's landed yet. He actually might have double donged yesterday. Did he double dong? I know for that's interesting. So Derek, you're saying RotoWire has Taijuan Walker confirmed for the early game, for the 1 o'clock game. That's interesting. Why are all the sports books saying the opposite? All right. Well, either. Well, actually, no. It's important, right? It's important for us to fully clarify that, because I remember looking at this game and I was like, oh, well, it wouldn't really matter whether it was Taijuan or Ranger. I don't like this line, and it's not like I'm lining up to fade Blake Snell right now. So look, instead of me talking about either pitcher, whether it's Walker or Suarez, let's talk briefly on Blake Snell. The stretch run he's on, going like 10, 11 starts now, and thanks for that confirmation, Derek. The streak that he's on now, going like 10 or 11 straight starts, something like that. He is just unhittable. I think he gave up like a 2-run homer like 2 weeks ago, and that was like the bulk of what he's been giving up, striking out a ton of guys. And it's crazy that a pitcher like him goes into these spells, good and bad, because this isn't the first time we've seen this. Now, granted, this is as good as he's been in his career as far as a stretch run of pitching goes, but we've seen him go through these hot and cold stretches where he goes 8-10 weeks where it's like quality starts, just mowing down like dominoes. And then he just goes into these really tough slides where it's like, it doesn't matter whether he's at home, on the road, doesn't matter if he's playing a team of good bats, bad bats. He's walking everybody. He's giving up a lot of hard contact. Man, that couldn't be further from the truth right now, though. He's been pitching really well. Now, you hope that the All-Star break didn't kind of shake him in terms of losing that momentum. Not to say it will or won't, but you hope that it doesn't. Because, yeah, he's in a spot here where he's going to see a ton of righty bats in a hot weather game where, in theory, Blake Snell could get hit up here. But I'm interested to see how he looks today. I do think that is a fat line in support of him. But let's be honest, he's not somebody you should have been fading recently either. Like, he's been phenomenal. And I know that you're paying extra vig, to back him these days. But, man, it almost feels like it's just not enough. So, on that front where you have Suarez going, you have Taijuan Walker going in this first start. In theory, at least from a righty perspective, he's a better pitcher at home. He's typically pretty good on righties, and that's the bulk of what the Padres have. At least their biggest bats are typically from the right side. So yeah, I think it's a game that in theory could make sense to potentially fire under. But look, you're talking a game in Philly where it's going to be 90 degrees with the ball carrying out, and yes, you have two great pitchers, but man, that park plays so small in weather like this. So, and look, Blake Snell's no stranger to the long ball, and neither is Taijuan Walker. So. Just something to consider there if you're like lining up to bet the under, targeting these pitchers, Walker's good at home and Snell's been on a run, so let me bet this under. That park can play quite small. And I felt fortunate yesterday to hit the over. One breath you'd argue I shouldn't have hit it. Another breath you'd argue, it should have come sooner, but a lot of home runs yesterday. A lot of home runs. There wasn't a whole lot of hits for the home runs, but yeah, just a ton of balls off the yard yesterday. I think it was like 6 or 7 home runs in that park. And again, it's hotter. This game's earlier. So, just something to consider, call food for thought. Alec Marsh for the Royals, another doubleheader that's kicking off. Royals, Rays, Tyler Glasnow. Look, Alec Marsh looked like dog shit in Double-A. They bumped him to Triple-A because in reality he's their number 3 or number 4 prospect. Now, granted, that's not saying much because it's still the Royals, but he actually looked really good in Triple-A. He hasn't looked good in his few starts now in the majors. And yeah, this is a big test for the kid. The line makes sense to me, as big as it is. Look, I'm not lining up to lay 285 or 290 with the Rays, but the line does make sense, right? Glasnow's in a spot to pitch really well today. And Marsh is a pitcher who's, first of all, young, at age 24, 25, and doesn't have a whole lot of MLB experience. And he has been giving up a lot of hard contact in his few starts. So yeah, obviously the kid has upside. Will that upside show today? I don't know. I'd probably say no, because the Rays, while they were streaking in a negative way, losing a bunch of games, not hitting, they did end on a high note, I believe, but they spiked a bunch of runs that Sunday before the All-Star break. Maybe they can carry that momentum to find their bats again. Because, yeah, I mean, if you guys remember the first 45 days of the season, they were like on a historic tear with their sticks. And so it was obvious they were going to cool down. But again, I think this is just a spot. To me, if you're playing early DFS, I don't know how you wouldn't just lock in Glasnow. Like, I know the price is not super ideal, but it's like you want to talk about your safe points on a slate. Like, it's just hard to fathom he buries you today. And not to say these other pitchers will or won't, because there's other great options. I mean, Snell's a great option. Obviously, we'll talk on Paxton and Bassick Allen, but Glasnow just almost makes too much sense. And as you look at the ownership projections of pitching today for this early slate, right? It's Snell at 40, Paxton 30, And where is, hold on. Oh, they didn't even include it. They didn't even include it in the doubleheader. Now I'm looking at the actual slate. Oh my God. I feel like such a moron. They didn't even include, which I guess in some breaths makes sense that they didn't include it in the doubleheader. But it's weird. Like they were okay to include the Philly game, but not anyway, whatever. So pay no mind. He obviously you can't play him, but if you're in an all day slate, to me, he's practically lock worthy. If you're on FanDuel or DraftKings where they have that Rays game posted. But yeah, the line makes sense to me. The total makes sense. You're going to get your 9 at bats to the Rays regardless. And if this game does become like a 4 or 5 run lead, you're not going to get the best bullpen from the Rays out there either. So yeah, I think, you can make the argument for both sides. The total and the spread on the game makes a ton of sense to me at where it's at. Red Sox and Cubbies. Now, this was a spot where I really, really, really wanted to bet the Cubs, especially at the price. I like backing Stroman at home. I like when he's a small, especially I like when he's like a pick'em or even a small dog. And like here, you get him plus 100, I think on FanDuel, minus 105 DraftKings. Why I don't want to bet this is I mentioned this before when we were talking about when I mentioned Derek's comment about stacking Boston. They're hot with their sticks, right? I mean, this team's 6 games over 500 now, and they looked like a different ball club like 2.5 weeks ago. So they've reeled off a ton of wins. Like I said, I'm pretty sure they're like 12-1 their last 13, something like that. And a lot of it, if you look up and down their scores, they've just been scoring a ton of runs. Their pitching hasn't been great, but it's been good enough. And their sticks have just really come to life. So, yesterday, I think they won again. It was an 8-3 or 7-3, something like that. So, they keep pouring on in that regard. Paxton's been good. I'll be honest. He's been a bit smoke and mirrors for me just because the 2.73 ERA has been good. The advanced stuff doesn't totally back that up. The velo's there, which is good. And I'm a big Maple guy. Obviously, I'm a closeted Seattle fan, and he was with us for quite a few years before going to the Yanks, and obviously now Boston making his way around the AL East. But he's very susceptible to being hit, and the Cubs have a lot of righties, especially with Pop. And I like Stroman at home. Again, however, I'm not looking to jump in front of this Boston hit train with what they've been going through. So again, you could make the argument, how could you fade Boston right now? Minus 120, small price on them. Grab a team that's got their sticks going against a pitcher that's susceptible to good bats in Stroman. But you could also look at it like, wow, Stroman's at home and you're getting him at a dog price. Almost feels like an overreaction, or a slight dog price. Almost feels like that. And again, you go back 2.5 weeks ago, these teams were very similar, and now they're quite far apart. Cubs have been kind of playing 50-50 ball at best, and the Red Sox have been on an absolute tear. So yeah, I don't like to fade hot teams. Boston's been playing well. All-Star break might have cooled them off, but it didn't yesterday. So yeah, ultimately fade spot for me. As far as the early slate goes, Paxton would not be a guy I'd want to target here. I look at him at 34-35% ownership. It's just that's a tough spot to get to, in my opinion. Looking around, the price makes sense. It's not like you can really complain about that. But from a leverage perspective, I'd rather basically at over half his ownership, I'd rather play Stroman. I know Stroman doesn't get you the strikeouts, but nobody's going to play this dude. And again, he's typically so much better at home. Not going to be crazy that he gets the ground balls going, squeaks a few Ks out. And again, people are going to look at that price difference and be like, oh, I'll just take Paxton for an extra 1,100. That's why the ownership is going to be higher on him. I'm not saying Paxton's a bad play at all. Just saying, again, on these small slates, you're looking for where you can find leverage. Truth be told, I wouldn't really play either pitcher. There's other pitchers in the next games I'm going to talk on that I would prefer over both. But, to me, comparing the two to one another, I would definitely have Stroman over Paxton just based on leverage. All right, so I like the 6 lefty bats, but that's why. Yeah, no, look, I get it there. I mean, Stroman can definitely struggle against left-handed sticks, so I don't blame you at all there. And again, you're not getting crazy ownership there either, so it's almost like a good spot to back the Boston Bats today as far as the DFS streets go. Okay, so Blue Jays D-back. So I have a bet that I made in this game. I bet the Blue Jays money line at minus 120. This feels like as good of a price you're going to find on Bassett in this spot. I get it. Zach Gallen's been phenomenal again this year. And the good part with him is the Diamondbacks have been good this year, right? And they owe part of that to him for sure. I mean, the dude's ERAs in the low 3s and the advanced stuff really backs him up too. Now, what's been interesting with Gallen is how this year in particular, he's not exactly that much more dominant versus righties than he is versus lefties. The weighted OBA for both is only separated by about 15 points. And we know the Jays have a ton of righties. And if you also look up and down Zach Gallen's like box scores and game logs, like against bad teams, he's pitched really well. And against good teams, he has gotten banged up a bit. I'm pretty sure he's given up 4 or 5 earned in 2 of his last 3 starts, and they were against good teams. So to me, you're getting Bassett, who didn't pitch well at all his last start. And you get a spot where you get the Jays at home. I much prefer the Jays bullpen over the D-backs. I much prefer the Jays lineup over the D-backs. And I'm not totally convinced that Gallen is that much better than Bassett. Don't get me wrong. Gallen's obviously top notch. But again, if you look at it from a strength of schedule standpoint, Gallen's been beating up on cupcakes and good teams have just hit him. And the Blue Jays obviously have a ton of sticks. To me, this line should be upwards of minus 145. It's just a ton of respect for the Diamondbacks and a ton of respect for Gallen in this spot. And I'd argue, when you call it the buy low, sell high, this is as good of a price as we're going to find on Bassett in a spot like this. Normally this would be a line I would almost expect this to be a pick 'em on the road, and a pick 'em on the road getting swung where you're back home would move about 25, 30 cents. And that's just not happening here. And like I said, I think this is a price gap issue. I know that this line didn't open here. It got steamed here. And now that it's here, it makes a ton of sense to back the Jays. So that's what I did at minus 120. That was at FanDuel. I think it's a little higher on DraftKings, but I just really, really like the spot, from a value standpoint. So that was where I fired. And then from an ownership standpoint, look, I said this last week that I thought Bassett was a good pivot. And I'm going to be honest, I think he's once again a good pivot. And I kind of use it in air quotes because he's going to see ownership, right? And he's going to be 27, 25% owned. But there's going to be 4 pitchers that are higher owned than him on the slate. So, yeah, I mean, to me, he's in a good spot at his price to outperform some of these other guys. I mean, look, it's going to be hard to not play Blake Snell on this slate. He's 8,200. He's been pitching phenomenal. But again, he's in that warm ballpark, and he's going to see a lot of righties today, and we're off a few extra days from the All-Star break. But it is a shame that they priced him at 8,200. But then again, like I said, people aren't going to really want to line up to play a guy like Bassett when Blake Snell's priced like that, right? So that's why he's going to be almost half the ownership of Snell. So consider me a big Bassett guy today. Won't play any Gallen, or wouldn't play any Gallen. He's the highest price pitcher here, I think. And I don't like the matchup for him at all. I mean, hence the fact that I bet the Blue Jays. So we'll move on to the last game on this early slate. And they don't usually do it like this. I kind of get why they did, but even if they did it like this, I'm surprised DraftKings didn't try to slot this Royals game in to the slate. And I'm sure they had the slate posted before. Maybe that news became official of the doubleheader, but because this slate would have been totally different if they included that Royals Rays game in it. It would have changed the pitching dynamic of how lineups look. But anyway, Guardians, Rangers, Andrew Heaney, and so the Gavin Williams from the Guardians. I mentioned this from his last start that it just felt like smoke and mirrors. And he's been pitching okay, but he's had some blow up innings. He's been what's been really impressive with him has been kind of like how, I don't want to say this kind of came out of nowhere, but he's been the Ks are there. The whip is there. But again, I mean, even his last start, I think he went like 6 innings of clean ball against the Royals, or 5 full innings of clean ball against the Royals, and then just kind of mini imploded in the 6th. He's been pitching really good early in games. Andrew Heaney, though, on the other end, I'm just not a Heaney guy. I used to be. I don't know. Another guy that I don't understand why he left the Dodgers. He had a great year, and now he comes here and he's struggling again. As for this spot, to me, this is the most unique game of the 4 because people like, number one, having that late game hammer where you can kind of get bailed out. You just watch the box scores of the first 3 games. You're just like, you see a bunch of zeros, right? And then you kind of maybe overstack the last game to give yourself some extra outs. But to me, I couldn't even fathom playing any pitcher against this Rangers team. Now I know that he's probably not going to see much ownership. It looks like 8%. He's 6K, which is fair. Right, it's fair enough where you could argue he's worth playing because he doesn't need to do much for you at 6K. But man, it's tough because you look at this slate and the Rangers make a lot of sense to try to find bats, and it's hard to obviously play the pitcher with any bats. So, but he's super cheap, so you don't need a whole lot out of him. I would think you should consider Gavin Williams, despite not wanting to totally line up against this Texas team. man, that price for this slate, you're always trying to find where you can find. You're always trying to find unique price point concerns, or where you can find extra leverage. I mean, concerns for other folks, because people are going to see Gavin Williams in this spot and they're just really not going to want to click his name. But again, when you look at his price, it doesn't really do much for you. A 6-inning, 6K, 3 earned run performance, which would be a quality start, would get you there. And it's not crazy to think that could happen out of him. So, I think he should be some considered. And Jason, that's what I've been mentioning. Like pitchers that leave the Dodgers, like at this point, it's just borderline ignorance, unless the Dodgers obviously don't want to pay you the money. But to me, it's becoming ignorant for the pitchers that are there, like leaving there, because they just like fix pitching. And yeah, it seems like Noah Syndergaard missed that memo. But for the most part, they just fix pitching. And when pitchers leave that organization, they just aren't the same. So yeah, and the shame of it is I liked Heaney when he was on the Angels. I liked actually seeing how well he did with the Dodgers. But now to see him come here and struggle, it's head scratching why he would have ever even left the Dodgers. But tis what it is. So that'll wrap up the early slate. Just to give you some hot takes, like I said, I do like Bassett. I do like. It's hard not to play Snell at that price. All right, so I do like them too, and I certainly would want to have some Stroman. I would play no Paxton, just because he's going to see a high ownership in a spot that makes sense that he might get tagged a bit. I could be convinced to some Gavin Williams. Absolutely no Andrew Heaney for me, and I'm seeing Heaney at sub 30%, which is just crazy to me. So yeah, and it's not like. And I get it. I get why 62, right? So it's like, if you can convince yourself into Gavin at 6, why couldn't you convince yourself at Heaney on 62? But Cleveland's got some decent righties, and Heaney's another one. Like, he just doesn't really eat innings, like not consistently anyway. So yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense from a leverage perspective, to go Gavin Williams over Heaney as well. And again, on these smaller slates, you're really looking for those leverage spots. You're not looking for, I'm just going to play my whole lineup of chalk, right? All right, so big park winning organization. Fair enough. All right, so we'll move on to the later games, right? And that's its own slate. I'll give you some tidbits here, but I'm not going to go crazy with DFS. I haven't looked at this slate from a DFS perspective. So if you have any questions, obviously, I'm happy to at least look into them and entertain them. But I'm being dead honest with you. This is going to be mainly bets from here. Orioles, Marlins, Kyle Gibson, and whose name is it? Braxton, right? Braxton Garrett. He's been pitching pretty well. And Gibson, look, when do you want to target Gibson, right? You like Gibson when he's home, right? So he's back home. But man, he's been tough to watch, whether it's home on the road this year. He hasn't been, just has not been good. But look, the Orioles, I don't want to say they're very quietly 20 games over 500, but we were hearing a lot about them earlier in the year. Kind of haven't heard as much about them, especially recently over the last few weeks. But they just kind of churn out wins. Their pitching's been a pleasant surprise. Not so much Gibson, but overall their pitching's been a pleasant surprise. Their bullpen's been a pleasant surprise, and obviously they have sticks up and down the lineup. This spot I'm kind of torn. I'm torn because there's no way right now Kyle Gibson should be favored over a decent arm, and Garrett's definitely proven to be a decent arm. However, the Marlins sticks can be tough, right? Don't get me wrong, when guys like Soler and De La Cruz are hitting balls that are leaving the yard, they're fine. But this team doesn't really string together a lot of hits. They don't have a lot of big innings. They don't exactly have a whole lot of threats, especially in the middle of the back of that lineup. So this is the type of spot where Kyle Gibson could find some success. But yeah, I don't know. I don't. And I wish Kyle Gibson was like just a true pick 'em in this spot. But even if he was, I probably wouldn't love it. Garrett's a good arm. It's a decent spot for the Marlins here as well, especially from a dog price. So yeah, I think you could convince yourself into either side here. The total is perfectly where it should be at 8.5. So I want no part of that. And other than that, we will just move on. Now, I don't typically like to even talk on game 2 of doubleheaders, primarily because you just don't know what's going to shake out with the bullpens. You don't know what's going to shake out with lineups. So I'm not even going to give this much thought. But you do look at a game where there's 2 pitchers that are much worse than the pitchers going in that first game, and the total's a full run higher. So that's something that would be a red flag for me. In terms of, maybe that's the spot where you bet the over. But again, if that first game they don't really run through any pen arms, you're getting a full healthy group of pen arms in that second game. Regardless, they're going to probably bring them out. So it's hard to love anything about that game right now until you get your lineups. Pirates Giants. So Giants are minus 165 behind Alex Cobb and Johan Oviedo. I want to be very clear. I really wanted to bet this game under, and especially bet the first 5 under. But woof, yesterday was kind of scary in this game. There was only 10 runs, but I would argue there should have been like 20 runs in that game. I think the teams combined for something ridiculous, like 4 for 25 or something with runners in scoring position. And that's kind of scary, right? Because that's a tremendous amount of foot traffic. Now, the reason why, if there was that much foot traffic, why not turn around and bet this over? So this is a decent sized number for this park. And when you consider the pitchers that are here as well, Cobb has been actually great this year. I mean, sure, maybe he's not been as good as the 2.91 ERA shows, but the advanced stuff really backs him up. He has struggled on the road. I think he has some pretty severe home road splits, or maybe that's Oviedo. I know one of these guys has severe home road splits. It's probably Cobb, though. Let me see. I have Oviedo's numbers in front of me, or had them in front of me. Yeah, so it's definitely Cobb. So, yeah, so that's a little scary, to be honest, right? But this also feels like it's a lot of respect for the Giants. The thing with Oviedo is he hasn't been pitching great, and he was typically a guy you could rely on to pitch much better at home. But now those numbers have kind of like medianed out, where he's just as good as home as he is in the road, or just as quote-unquote bad. So moral of the story, I did not bet this game under. I really wanted to. I was trying to find every reason to do so. But it's kind of something that, like, when you look at a total and you look at the starters, you kind of have an initial bias at times on what you want to do. And sometimes when you research and you kind of look at certain things or certain aspects of the game, you kind of push yourself towards that bias. Maybe it's in your subconscious, or maybe yourself just kind of pushing yourself towards that bias that you had before, you even started looking into the game. So, I think that for me, I did have a bias looking at this, that the under would make sense. However, I was able to convince myself out of it. So it could hit, but it wasn't enough value for me to even recognize. Athletics Twins, Pablo Lopez, minus 235-ish in this spot at the Athletics. The Athletics had quite the first half. But believe it or not, as much as people ragged on the Athletics and how historically bad they're going to be, they're not, what are they, one game worse than the Royals? So not much of a difference there. These days, it seems like the Athletics are just trying to do any type of version of Russian roulette with their pitching staff. Hogan Harris, I don't even know how this dude is still like in the majors. A tremendous amount of hard contact. He doesn't really strike anybody out. You could make the argument he eats 5 innings every start, but he also tends to give up like 4 earned every one of those starts. The Twins in theory should hit him today, but it's a big park. It's not a warmed game today in Oakland. So I don't know. This could be a spot where, he just finds himself wiggling out of jams. And Pablo, to his credit, has been pitching. I know that he started the season on a crazy tear, and then he went bad again, but then he kind of found some good again. So he's kind of been playing that Jekyll and Hyde this year thus far, as streak runs go. Interested to see how he pitches here, because he should pitch well. I will say this, though, the Athletics, especially a week or two before the All-Star break, they were starting to get some serious foot traction on the bases. They run a ton, and they know they don't have a lot of power, but it just felt like, especially in that Boston series, it felt like every inning there was guys in scoring position on the A's end of things. So, maybe they kind of pile that in and they keep somewhat of sticks going, because Pablo has been shown on the road, especially where he can get hit. But total of 8 makes sense. Minnesota is probably a little too padded here, but I'm not lining up to bet the Athletics. I mean, if you've been doing that all year, you've been losing a lot of money. So overall, the spot, don't love it, and it's a stay away. So move on to the next game, Reds Brewers. This was a spot where I bet this over 9.5 at FanDuel plus 100. So here's how I look at this. Yesterday there was scorching heat in Cincinnati. Right. And some of that may have played towards why the bats were so terrible. But let's be honest, pitchers just have to struggle just as much. It's going to be not nearly as warm today, but it still will be, should still feel about 80 degrees-ish. Wind kind of blowing out to left center, kind of. It's going to depend on the time. And that, of course, is subject to change as well. The reason why I like this over, so Freddie Peralta, or as my guy Gary calls him, Fastball Freddie, always seems to struggle on the road. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, even when he has a clean box score at a surface level, like even when it's like 6 innings, 1 earned, it's usually like 4 walks and like 3 hits, 4 hits, and like just dealing with constant traffic around the bases. I see no reason here why that wouldn't be the case again. And for me, I think the Reds end of things, first of all, they had quite a stretch run going into the All-Star break. Now, they cooled off a bit in front of it, but to be honest, they've been phenomenal. And I've been saying how it just makes sense that this team will start to fall off. And look, they just continue to kind of ride things out. They should be in first in that division. They were probably tied for it with the Brewers, but ultimately good for them. On the other side of things, Andrew Abbott. So for me, when you put a lefty up against Milwaukee, and sure, they strike out a ton. I expect this to be another spot where they probably pile up Ks. But for me, Abbott's been good, but he has not been great. And he's going to see, sure, at a surface level, he's been great, but the advanced stuff doesn't really back him up. His ERA and his Sierra and all that stuff, it's like basically over a full run higher. And now you're pitching in a ballpark where the ball is going to obviously have some tremendous carry tonight. Freddie Peralta is no stranger to the home run ball. And Abbott has been a bit fortunate in many stances, and he was giving up a lot of home runs in AAA, and now magically that problem has kind of subsided. So to me, this dude is going to leave some balls up, and all you need is some of these right-handed power sticks of the Brewers, or even a guy like Yelich from the left side, to just put a few over the fence. Yesterday's game 1-0 saw some top pen arms from both sides. Obviously, the Brewers who won the game, and Corbin Burns pitched really well yesterday, piling up strikeouts. And just this line feels like just a complete overreaction. Remember, yesterday Corbin Burns, was going up against what's the kid's name with the high? He's got a ridiculously high ERA. It's like 6.5. But the total of that game was 10. So you're telling me that these two pitchers collectively are over a half run difference? Because I got over 9.5 plus 100. You can even find 9. You just have to pay minus 120. I'd prefer to play 9. I'd prefer to pay 9.5 at plus 100. To pay 20 cents for that half run is kind of silly. So that's why I prefer the 9.5 at plus 100. But yeah, the idea that from yesterday to today, the full drop off is over a full run. Yeah, no, thank you. I'm happy to jump on this over. I think you're going to get a ton of foot traffic here. Look, will result in this game going over. Look, that's going to matter if we get an extra home run or two, or if these guys are runners in scoring position come through. But I do think both these starters are going to be in mud in this game. And again, when they kick it over to the Pens, you got a bunch of guys that were used yesterday from both sides. So I really like the spot for that to fly over the number. No pun intended. Royals, Rays, game 2 doubleheader. Brady Singer's definitely going for the Royals. For the Rays, still undecided. I've already told you guys my thoughts on doubleheaders and not having enough information. So, yeah, we'll move on. Braves, White Sox, Lance Lynn, Spencer Strider. What is there to say about Strider? I will tell you this. If Blake Snell continues to pitch how he's pitching, he's going to give Strider a strong run for that Cy Young. But Strider's just he's been so good between obviously the big fastball and the slider. It's like he feels like he has so much rotation on every one of his pitches. He's actually really fun to watch in that regard. But look, minus 300 in this spot. That is such a big line. But look, what is that telling you, right? That's telling you the books are just sick of people betting the Braves. Because look, as good as Strider is, minus 305 in this spot feels enormous. But with that in mind, who exactly is lining up to bet the White Sox today, fading Strider? Now, granted, I do think this line opened too big, which is probably makes sense for why it came down. And even what it's at currently at 305. And let me just look at what's on DraftKings currently. Currently 285. So you're getting a lot of buyback down, which again to me makes sense because as good as Strider is, 305, 320, like that's just a crazy line for the spot, to be honest. Like you expect this to be the line when like the Braves play the Marlins and the Marlins are throwing out like their worst pitcher. At least the White Sox have some sticks from the right side. I know they've had some health issues and I know they've way underachieved, much like the Cardinals have. But it just feels like a thick line overall. But pass for me on the game. I'm obviously not lining up to like 300. And as for the total, though, I think you could be convinced in both directions. 8.5 for this park and this type of weather with these two starters, it feels a bit light. But it wouldn't surprise you, right, if Strider went 7 shutout innings and you'd really need the Braves to get you there alone. So, yeah, and with them being home as well doesn't help because you'd likely lose that last at-bat regardless. So, yeah, we'll pass. We'll move on to the next game. Mets-Dodgers game will be on Fox, premier game today or tonight. So Senga goes for the Mets, and he's been really good, right? Really good. And Gonsolin, I've never been a Gonsolin guy. I feel all the confidence in the world when this dude leads the Dodgers organization. He's going to be dog shit. but he continues to churn out decent performances. I did bet the Mets yesterday. It was surprising how little they did against the lefty. I forgot his name for the Dodgers that pitched yesterday. And it was tough to see Verlander, who's pitched pretty well at home most of the year, pitch as poorly as he did yesterday. But, regardless, and Marte has been in like the craziest of slumps. I feel like that dude leaves 4 or 5 guys on every day. But in this spot, it's hard for me to go back to the Mets here. I don't want to lay. I hate laying juice. I hate laying juice in spots like this where it's just the Dodgers. Like the idea of like laying 115, 120, 125 in spots against teams like the Dodgers just seems minus EV all year long when you're choosing those spots to do so. Again, not to say Senga can't pitch well here. He probably could. I didn't like what I saw from the Mets sticks yesterday at all. Maybe they'll bounce back, but I did like coming into the All-Star break how their sticks did sort of come to life. But look, let's be honest. The Mets have a lot of work to do. Buck Showalter has definitely pissed some Mets fans off this year. And I have a lot of respect for Showalter. If you look at the teams he's built up over the years, what he did with Texas, what he did with Baltimore, it felt like he was inheriting the best team he ever has. And he just, I'm sure obviously it's not all him, right? But you expect him to be getting more out of his guys because this is a talented team. Alonso's in just a ridiculous slump. But needless to say, I don't love anything in this game. I wanted to go back to bet the Mets. I just can't lay 120 against the Dodgers. I just think that's minus EV anytime you're doing it. But all right, we'll move on. Cardinals Nationals. This was another game I bet. I actually really like this over, and I know they're going to resume this game at 2:15. And in theory, but in theory that could go a few different ways. If the Cardinals game remains low scoring, you're going to see the Cardinals quickly go to their top pen arms to try to lock up a win here. The same thing with the Nationals, right? And look, I have no respect for the Cardinals pen regardless, even their top arms. But they do have 1 or 2 at least decent arms, especially towards the back end of that pen to close games out. Steven Matz comes off a great pitching performance, and he actually didn't pitch bad the time before that either. It was just a much shorter start. It was like 2.1 or 2.2 innings. His last start was surprising in a positive way, right? He pitched really well. I don't have any trust that this dude will just go on a stretch run pitching well. I think this is another spot in warm weather in St. Louis where you're going to get a carry out of that ball, and I don't trust him at all. I also don't trust him at all to go past 5 or 6 innings. So, and it goes back to the bullpen conversation with the Cardinals on this first game. You can't bring your starters back, and you're going to have to bring in random bullpen arms. And then you're going to want, as soon as you have a lead in like the 6th, you're going to start wanting to bring in your closeout arms, which is going to impact this game in particular, right? Because you're not going to bring those guys back into the game for 7 o'clock. And Irvin is not a guy I've had much respect for at all. He's been okay at best. But I always tell you guys, like when you see guys that pile up a whip of 1.5-ish, even higher. I know he's not over 1.5, but he's close. And he also has really struggled with lefties. Not that that's going to be a big deal here with all the righties, but yeah, he's going to see some righty field pop today from the Cardinals. And again, if you're the Cardinals, your division's not doing so good that you're totally out of it. But man, if they're going to go on a run, it's got to happen soon. Because they have really struggled this year with how, and you look at their roster, their starting pitch and their bullpen, their lineup up and down. This is not a 38-52 team, but they've obviously played like it. So, but yeah, anyway, I really like this over. You get a perfectly warm weather game in St. Louis. Steven Matz, who tends to have strong issues with long fly balls. And Irvin on the other end, who I have little respect for. Granted, in theory, he could pitch well against these righty bats, but he's another guy that doesn't eat innings either. So I just think this is a spot where you're going to get 2 mid at best arms, below mids, if you will, that are going to go 5-ish innings, and then it's going to get turned over to the pens. And to me, the game could nuke from there anyway. It also could nuke with these guys on the hill. So either way, I really like the spot for that game to go over. And Smoke, I'll be honest. It doesn't even surprise me at all. They very well might. I can't imagine right now, though, they'd be looking to tank because, yeah, their odds are bleak, but they're far from out of it right now. It's a long season. It is a very long season. What's up, Boynton? So anyway, we'll move on to the next game. Rockies Yanks. Yesterday, Rockies, I think, won, 7-2, something like that. Wasn't a crazy surprise, right? The Rockies sticks seem to find life at home. Connor Siebold is a tough pitcher to watch. Now, this total is 11.5, and I know that the total didn't go over yesterday. It's hard to love this over just because both teams just don't have a lot of girth in their lineups. Like I get it. The Rockies tend to find their sticks at home and whatnot, but Clark Schmidt has been was on a pretty decent run for a while where he was pitching really well. Then he kind of lost himself a bit. He hasn't been great on the road. You throw him in Coors, this would seem like not a good spot for him. But on the other end, Connor Siebold's been absolutely abysmal. It's going to be super warm in Colorado. I could definitely be convinced into the over. It just feels like a big number for this spot when you take into account the actual lineups for both teams. But again, the pitching is definitely going to help you get there. So either way, you get the warm game in Colorado. This is obviously going to be a fun game to stack. But yeah, I watch Connor Siebold pitch, and it feels like he's got a decent start coming. Is it going to come here? I don't know. I probably have more respect for Connor Siebold than maybe he has for himself. But either way, this game becomes a pass for me. I do think the Yankees are a bit heavy priced here, though. So call it a slight lean on the Rockies, maybe even first 5 grab that half run. But obviously in these types of parks, you could easily get a 3-run home run that just botches the whole first 5, right? So I stayed away, but if you need a lean out of me, I'd lean the Rockies first half plus the half run, and Rockies bats for me over the Yankees bats. Angels, Astros, Reed Detmers, Framber Valdez. Detmers has pitched so well this year, and he has a 2-6 record to show for it. It's been nice to see him kind of elevate himself a bit. This is not a great spot for him. Even though I know the Astros are still dealing with injuries in their own way, but it's not a great spot for him here. Framber Valdez is typically good, but you're going to throw Valdez on the road, a left-hander against a righty-heavy Angels lineup. The total here, to me, it does make sense to fire on this over. But why I didn't is because Detmers has just been good. Like the problem with Detmers years back was he just really struggled at right-handed bats. That hasn't been nearly as much of a problem for him this year. And Framber Valdez, when he gets hot in a game, it just feels like he's unhittable. So it's why for me the arrow's pushed around enough to not love it. It's not going to be super warm in Anaheim tonight, so it's not going to get a crazy carry on the ball either. So to me, actually, this line makes a decent amount of sense. I do think, similar to the Rockies game, I do think it's a lot of respect for the Astros here. I wouldn't mind taking the half run with the Angels, but not near enough to love it. I would have wanted this price to be about 15 cents better for me to jump. Various slightest of leans there, and I even hate using that word lean, but that's kind of where my head's at for that game. Mariners, Tigers. So the Mariners lost yesterday, I think by 1 run. They shouldn't be losing to the Tigers right now when they really need to win baseball games with them playing now 500 ball. George Kirby's been really good for this team. I think he came up last year, and he's really been stable in this. I mean, he should have a much better record than 8-7. The Mariners sticks this year have been so underwhelming. Their bullpen hasn't been amazing either. Lorenzen's been actually decent. Like he's not great, but he's a guy I typically like to fire when he's home. On the road here, it's hard to love. But then again, like Seattle's lineup's not exactly something that you love either. This total being at 7.5 is low. The Seattle Park, what is it? T-Mobile Park, I think, has played like it's played as one of the biggest parks this year. So I get the total being 7.5, and after yesterday's debacle with the Mariners, like the Mariners lineup is just so blah, and it's hard to even understand why. But either way, and I think that the Mariners surged late yesterday, but still couldn't come through. So the Tigers used a bunch of pen arms to get there. Mariners used a few of their pen arms. When I say few, obviously they used their bullpen, but like a few of their good pen arms. So I actually, believe it or not, I actually lean this over. This number feels small because Kirby, while he's been good, he typically just ends up giving up contact. Same thing with Lorenzen, especially on the road. So it feels like a light number, to be honest. And especially since the Pens got taxed yesterday too, I could probably be convinced into betting this over. I wish it was just a little lighter. Like if this was 7 at the same price, I'd have already jumped. But look, it's a game of inches, right? You don't want to overreact to certain spots and try to find value where it doesn't exist. But a slight lean on that over the number. All right, so that wraps up the slate. We get this done in 45 minutes. 45 minutes. So look at that. Little speed sesh, if you will. So this is over all day. First game, always under second. Yeah, so I don't mind that logic at all, Smoke, because obviously you typically get your better lineups. Now, granted, there are times where teams will deliberately sit some of their studs in the early game, knowing that they're going to play them in the late game. So, you often have that. And United, thank you. Yeah, hit the like button. Ain't going to kill you, right? I'm here on a Saturday with you guys. So overall, I know I didn't get too much DFS chatter, so I apologize for that. I knew I wasn't going to dive into the DFS treats today, so I didn't want to go crazy with it. But the early slate was easy to talk about because there's only 4 games. Obviously, as you get to the 12-game slate, I didn't want to just start rubbing you with nonsense. But the betting perspective, obviously, I walked through every game kind of, and maybe you could leverage that for your DFS builds in terms of the perspectives there. But either way, there shouldn't be any rain delays or postponements today. You shouldn't have to worry about that from a DFS standpoint. It will be very warm in a lot of places, so do expect balls to carry park to park, and we expect this coming, over the next month or so. It's very warm. But with all that said, look, I hope you all stay safe, gamble responsibly, and yes, run pure. I'll see you guys tomorrow with Joey and the crew talking more baseball. Later.